Hello, I'm Rich Hammar, legal counsel for the General Counsel of the Assemblies of God, and welcome to this installment of Risk Management Live. Today I'm going to be interviewing Jerry Sparks, my sidekick over here, who's president of AG Financial Insurance Solutions, about a very significant topic that many of you are probably exposed to but don't know it, and that's cyber liability coverage. Does your insurance policy contain coverage for cyber liability? And of course, we need to understand what is cyber liability before we can decide whether we need insurance coverage for it or whether we have it, whether we should be concerned if we don't. So I'm going to talk with Jerry Sparks about that topic today. And Jerry, I think maybe to start, we should define what we mean by cyber liability. Before we can decide if we need insurance to cover it, we need to know what it is.
Yeah. So cyber liability actually is the protection of information and the dissemination of information and the protection of the computer itself from outside hackers or the loss of information that can happen. So, and a lot of it has to do with the loss of information that can happen. And when we start talking about cyber insurance, there's a lot of things that you want to make sure that your cyber insurance would actually cover, and there's lots of different classes really for cyber liability. So, you know, cyber liability is in a place where sexual misconduct was probably in the 1980s. Back in the 1980s, sexual misconduct was just covered under the general liability. Well, with the dissemination of computers and the World Wide Web and everything, they've actually come up where, okay, this is not really covering where our liability is, so we've actually made a cyber liability policy.
And what are some of the things that that policy would cover that would be common potential losses for a church? In other words, make the case that a pastor watching us today would want to get this coverage.
Sure. So actually, probably the first and foremost is it's going to provide cyber, privacy, and network security liability. So, and basically that is covering their failure to protect private or confidential information of others. Now, the interesting thing here, it does not actually have to be on a computer, hopefully, to have the cyber liability, because there's only really one way to protect privacy, to protect HIPAA, health insurance, employee files. If you lose that information, you had a protected right, basically, where the government can come in and go after you. The only way to properly protect this is through your cyber liability policy, as long as it will cover the privacy where it does not limit it to the computer. I would not write a computer or cyber liability policy that did not give you a right of privacy coverage also. Let's talk about ties. A lot of churches now are taking ties on credit cards. What most people don't understand is there's a contractual liability that happens to that credit card company if there's a loss of that information. So most credit card companies actually make you responsible if they have a loss of the information. So you may have to do all the notifications, and you may have to be responsible because you actually signed the contract with them. Regulatory proceedings. That's defense for regulatory actions and give coverage for the fines and penalties that may occur. So you lose information, some vital information of somebody. In some states, you've got 48 hours to notify them of a possible breach of their information. And the fines can be...
They're not even going to know about it.
They're not even going to know about it. The fines can be real hefty there. So you just have to know that sort of stuff. And the fines, you know, when you look at a lot of the computer breaches that have happened here in the last year, which I'll go about that in a little bit, but it can be enormous, the amount of money that you're talking about. Media liability. A lot of people don't think about media liability, but a lot of people put on their computer system pictures that they may take, or they may say, oh, I like a picture of this church, I'll put a picture of this church in, or I'll put a picture of this or that. Well, it may actually be protected information. It may be copyright or infringement, and someone else can sue you for using their media on your system. Cyber Incident Response Fund. One of the biggest things is forensics, to know whose information got stolen, notification costs to those affected, credit monitoring for those who were affected, and the public relations that you may use. Business interruption, which would include loss of profits and expenses for interruption in the system. Contingent business interruption adds losses for interruption from other people's systems that you may be using.
Tell me how that would apply to a church. What kind of losses would be involved there?
They may use a third-party system to have all their information in. And if that has a computer breach, they may not have access to that information, which if it's their credit card company and they don't know the money's coming in, they may not get that money. Well, if half their money's coming in from tithes and offerings, they could have a business interruption till they get that straightened out. Digital recovery costs to restore and replace damaged data and software. You may have somebody that says, hey, if you don't pay us this ransom, we're going to shut you down.
So this would provide coverage for that as well, because we've heard of a lot of cases involving ransomware.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of cases in regards to ransomware, and this would actually restore your media completely back to where it should be.
Because of a backup?
Whether they have a backup or not. So basically, again, let's talk about somebody taking your information, hacking your information, and not giving it back to you, where you don't have control of it. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the claims, and I'll give you an example of one that was pretty serious that involved a church. Mm-hmm. And then network extortion, payments to prevent digital destruction of your system, impairment, or extra expense. So those are really what cyber liability should cover, and you need to make sure that your insurance company, if you're getting cyber liability, actually is picking up all of these coverages, because a lot of them do not.
Well, let's get this very practical now, Jerry, in terms of your own experience. Give us some examples maybe of cases you've actually seen.
Actually, I'll go a little bit what is causing the cyber claims and the industry trends. So hacking is the number one reason why you have a cyber liability claim. And I'll give you a very unbelievable one, but I had a church website, and if you went to open the church website, it says, meet our pastors, and you click the picture of the pastor, and when you went to click the picture of the pastor, a picture of a naked man came up. And the church called me because they couldn't figure out how to get it off of there. So somebody had hacked their system and redirected that system where it was putting that up.
And that wasn't the pastor?
That was not the pastor. No, it was not the pastor.
Who was it?
I don't know who it was, but it was not the pastor. Human error is the second most reason that we have claims. And that could be opening attachments to emails, having a bad email. You need to look who sent you that email. Do you know that person? I call it W-2 fizzing. We had a church that basically had a letter from the IRS, but it was the IRSO, Internal Revenue Service Office.
Well, that sounds legitimate.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Or you put an IRSD. It's not the IRS, it's IRS something. But it looked like it was from the IRS. Please send us all your W-2s. And because we're, checking you out. I had a note from a senior pastor.
And now what would they do with that information?
If they get the W-2 information, then they can actually sell that information, and you're going to have to give credit ratings for every one of those employees.
Because it has compensation information plus a social security number.
Yes.
An address, all the personal identifiable information.
It's got everything in there. Yeah. So it's federally protected.
And some people succumb to that.
Some people have succumbed to it. That's when I get the phone call. Mm-hmm. I had a note from a senior pastor. He was actually in the Philippines and sent a note to the business administrator asking him to wire him some money. The problem was he wasn't in the Philippines and he didn't know anything about it. And this guy goes, he thought about it. He goes, I know he was just traveling, was on a missions trip. I didn't know he was going to the Philippines. And he was getting ready to do that, but he made the smart choice and called the pastor first. The actual email looked like it was actually from the senior pastor. So it's amazing. All of us have been affected by the largest data breaches. So there's some really large data breaches that I'm sure affected you. They affected me in that I had to have my credit card changed 4 times in the last 2 years. So I had to get it updated. So Yahoo got hacked. Equifax was the second largest hack. Equifax still doesn't know exactly how many people got hacked, but I can tell you I was one of them. My wife shopped at Target. Target got hacked. Home Depot, Anthem Blue Cross, JP Morgan, eBay, Adobe. So if you know any of these or you shop at any of these places, you may have been hacked. Equifax had over 3 million people hacked. Just think about this, 3 million people, and you have to give credit monitoring to them for a year. Not only do you have to do the notification, which is going to cost you a bundle, but you have to give credit monitoring for the year. So we're talking really big numbers. 3 years ago, we really weren't even talking about cyber liability because it wasn't as big of an issue. But in today's society, cyber has become a big issue. And I would put it this way. Any insurance that I write right now, and part of the AG program which we handle, it is mandatory that you have cyber liability. We don't give the churches a choice. We automatically put some cyber liability in there because I had a church that I wrote 2 months later, they had information that possibly disappeared. The cost to handle the forensics and the notifications was over $32,000.
And you know, these hackers, my understanding is they're never caught. And so they can do this with impunity. And so the issue is not going after them and getting your money back. It's you got to take preventive steps to make sure these things don't happen in the first place.
You're absolutely right. So a lot of these could be people in foreign countries. And I will tell you, because of the note to send money to a foreign country, the FBI got involved with that case. And the FBI basically told me that the chances of them finding out who did it, they have way too many of these to ever figure it out. So if you get a letter from a prince that if you'd help him get his money out of the country and it's going to give you $2 million, just give us your bank number and we'll put it in, put the money in there and you can keep $1 million of it and send me $1 million. Don't buy it. If it's looks too good to be true, then it probably is.
You know, the Securities Exchange Commission says that very thing in trying to educate the public. And they say, how likely is it that a complete stranger would tell you, a complete stranger, that he has a fortune he wants to split with you, whether it's a Nigerian prince or whatever the case may be. So you got to be careful. And just as you said, the SEC informs the public. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And be very wary.
If your church is out there, you need to look into this coverage and you need to make sure that all of those coverages that we went through, that your policy is actually covering that, because there's a lot of cyber liability policies out there that will cover one or two pieces of that. So whatever your needs are, you need to make sure that you have cyber liability.
And Jerry, this type of insurance is not expensive, is it, for a church?
No, it really is. It's quite reasonable. For less than $100 a year, you can get $50,000 worth of cyber liability limits. You can actually go all the way up to $1 million limit, and it would still be, $200 to $300.
Okay, so it's definitely a form of insurance that all church leaders should be thinking about seriously, or it's one of those cases they may regret not having done so.
Yes.
Well, we want to thank you, Jerry, for leading us in this very important discussion of cyber liability insurance coverage on this segment of Risk Management Live, and we'll see you next time.